I should have listened to the locals when they told me not to hike the Appalachian trails alone. They said the mountains had a way of swallowing people whole, that once you stepped off the beaten path, the woods themselves could turn against you. I laughed it off back then, brushed it aside like some old backwoods superstition, but the truth is I wasn't laughing when the sun started to dip behind the ridges and the forest swallowed the last of the daylight. The deeper the shadows grew, the quieter everything became. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that presses against your ears, the kind that makes you feel like something's holding its breath. That was when I first heard it. Faint, deliberate, a crunch of leaves that didn't belong to me. I froze, my backpack strap tightening in my grip as I scanned the trees. Nothing moved, but the sound was real. In that moment, every story I'd shrugged off came rushing back. The whispers of things that lived in the hollows, things that could mimic a man's steps, things that stalked you until you begged to be found. And as darkness closed in, I realized I wasn't alone out there. When I first set out that morning, everything seemed perfect. The Appalachian air was crisp and sharp in my lungs, the kind of cold that wakes you up better than any cup of coffee ever could. The trail cut through rolling hills that glowed golden under the late sun, and the trees stood so tall and dense it felt like stepping into another world. I remember thinking how beautiful it all was, how alive the forest felt. It was easy to forget how quickly that beauty could turn against you. I'd been hiking for hours when I noticed the trail markers were gone. At first I thought I'd simply missed one, distracted by the way the light filtered through the branches above. But the path beneath my boots grew thinner, less worn, until it wasn't a path at all anymore, just dirt and roots stretching endlessly ahead. I told myself it was fine, that I could find my way back. My phone had no service, of course, but that didn't surprise me. Out here, the mountains rose like walls, swallowing every signal, every connection to the outside world. That was when I began to feel it. That subtle shift, like the woods were watching. The wind had died, leaving only the occasional rustle of something moving far off in the brush. My footsteps seemed louder than they should have been, crunching against the leaves in a way that didn't echo, didn't belong. I stopped once, held my breath, listened. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, faint but clear, came the sound of another step. Not mine. Not a deer scatter or the scratch of some small animal. This was heavy, measured, human. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, and my chest tightened, as if the air itself had turned heavier. I spun around, searching the trees, but there was no one there. Only shadows stretched long and deep between the trunks, hiding whatever might have been watching me. I wanted to call out, to break the silence, but some instinct told me not to. Instead, I pulled my backpack closer and forced myself to keep walking, every step echoing the fear that I wasn't the only one on this mountain anymore. I told myself to stay calm, to just backtrack until I found the main trail again. But the longer I tried, the more it felt like the woods were shifting around me. I walked in what I thought was a straight line, only to end up in places I didn't recognize. Gnarled trees with bark twisted like faces, mossy stones that looked too deliberate, as if they'd been placed there. The trail was gone, swallowed up by the forest, and no matter which way I turned, the ridges all looked the same. That's when I heard it, a sound that froze me mid-step. It started faint, almost like someone calling out far in the distance. Not quite human, not quite animal. My brain scrambled to make sense of it, clinging to rationality. Maybe an elk, maybe a bird. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The call rose and fell in strange cadences, stretched syllables that didn't belong to any creature I knew. Then came the whispers. At first I thought it was the wind shifting through the leaves. But no, it was too deliberate, too patterned. Voices, low, hushed, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The sound seemed to move with me, slipping from one side of the trees to the other, always just out of reach. Panic burned in my chest, but I forced myself forward, every muscle in my body screaming to run. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement between the trunks, dark and fast, vanishing the moment my eyes caught it. My heart thundered in my ears. I wasn't imagining it. Something was pacing me, shadowing my steps, never showing itself fully. And then, God, I still remember it clear as day. I thought I heard my own name. Faint, drawn out, carried on the air like a secret. It was my voice, but not mine. Warped. Wrong. That's when the warning I'd laughed at before came crashing back. If you ever hear your name in the woods, don't answer. It's not a person calling you. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep silent. But terror had already rooted itself deep inside me. Whatever was out there, it knew me. It was calling me closer. By the time night fell, I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. The forest seemed to drink in what little light the moon offered, leaving everything cloaked in black. My flashlight beam shook in my trembling hand, bouncing wildly across the trees until it landed on something that stopped me cold. A cabin. It was barely standing, its roof sagging, windows broken out, wood gray with rot. Still in that moment it looked like salvation. Shelter. A barrier between me and whatever was following me. I hurried inside, shoving the door open against the weight of years. The smell hit me first. Damp, mold, and something metallic. Inside, the walls were etched with symbols I didn't recognize. Crude carvings of spirals, eyes, and jagged shapes. Animal bones littered the floor, some strung together and hanging from the rafters like charms. It wasn't a place meant for living. It was a place meant for keeping something out. Or maybe keeping it in. Then I heard it, the crunch of leaves outside, slow, deliberate. My breath caught in my throat as something circled the cabin. A tap echoed against the wall, light but intentional, followed by another on the opposite side, as if it was moving around me, and then a voice. It was my mother's voice, soft, calling my name the way she used to when I was a kid. For a heartbeat, my body almost obeyed, almost answered back. But the sound cracked at the edges, dragging too long on the syllables, twisting familiar comfort into something that made my skin crawl. One by one, other voices followed. Friends, family, people I hadn't spoken to in years, all layered, circling the cabin, coaxing me to step outside. My knees shook as I pressed my back against the wall, whispering to myself that none of them were real. That was when I understood. This wasn't some animal stalking me. This wasn't even human. It was older than the cabin, older than the carvings, older than anything that walked upright. The Appalachians hadn't grown around it. This thing had been here long before people ever set foot on these mountains. And now, it had found me. The voices outside fell silent all at once, as if some signal had been given. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise. I held my breath, straining to hear anything, when the air inside the cabin shifted. It wasn't the door. It wasn't the windows. It was like the walls themselves had allowed something to seep through. The darkness in the far corner thickened, pulsing as if it had weight. My flashlight beam caught nothing but empty air, yet I could feel it, like the trees themselves had stepped inside, bending and twisting into a shape that wanted to resemble a man but couldn't quite hold it. Its outline shimmered, branches, bending where arms should be, bark rippling like flesh. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe until the thing tilted its head toward me. The sound it made wasn't a growl or a hiss. It was the groan of trees in a storm, the rumble of the mountain itself. My body finally broke free of the paralysis and I bolted. The door didn't resist me this time. I crashed into the night, lungs burning, legs pumping blindly through the underbrush. Behind me, I heard it moving, but not in footsteps. More like the forest shifting to follow, the ground and trees bending with it. It wasn't just chasing my body. I could feel it pressing against something deeper, reaching for the part of me that no sprint could protect. My soul felt exposed, as if each desperate breath gave it more of me to claim. Branches whipped my face, roots grabbed at my ankles, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might burst. Still, the sense of pursuit never faltered. The thing was everywhere, the shadows, the rustling leaves, the shiver running down my spine. I don't know how long I ran before. My legs finally gave out before I stumbled and fell hard against the earth. When I pushed myself up, blinking through tears and sweat, I saw it. Not the thing, but a narrow trail, barely visible, overgrown with weeds and half-buried stones. It looked ancient, forgotten. And in that moment, with nothing left in me but terror, I staggered onto it, praying it might lead me somewhere, anywhere that wasn't here. The trail carried me forward like it wanted me gone. My legs barely worked, every muscle trembling with exhaustion, but somehow, I kept moving. The black sky softened to gray, and when the first pale light of dawn bled over the ridges, I stumbled through the last line of trees and collapsed onto gravel. A road. I lay there gasping, the rough stones digging into my palms, too stunned to believe I'd found my way out. The world felt almost unreal, the steady hum of morning birdsong clashing against the nightmare I'd left behind. Headlights cut through the mist, and a truck slowed beside me. The driver jumped out, his face full of shock, questions tumbling from his mouth that I couldn't answer. He helped me into the cab, and as we pulled away, I should have felt safe. But I didn't. Because under the growl of the engine, I thought, I heard it. Faint, deliberate. The soft rhythm of footsteps keeping pace with the truck. I pressed my forehead against the glass, eyes searching the trees, but nothing moved. Maybe I escaped. Maybe I didn't. Out here, in these mountains, you never really know if something let you go or just followed you home. I thought I was prepared for anything. I had my gear packed neatly, maps folded in my bag, and a confidence that came from reading too many survival blogs. A solo camping trip in the Appalachians felt like the escape I needed. Just me, the mountains, and silence. I told myself it would be simple, peaceful even. But standing there with the trees crowding in around me, I didn't realize I wasn't the one doing the watching. The first night should have been uneventful. I set up my tent, lit a small fire, and listened to the forest breathe. For a while, it almost felt perfect, until the sounds changed. It wasn't the rustle of small animals or the distant cry of an owl. It was heavier, slower, a sound too measured to belong to chance. Leaves crunching just beyond the reach of the firelight. I sat frozen, ears straining, waiting for it to reveal itself. Nothing came forward, but nothing left either. The footsteps would fade, only to return from a different angle, circling. That was when the unease set in. I thought I came here to escape. I didn't know I was walking straight into a hunt. The drive up into the Appalachian backcountry had felt like freedom itself. Winding dirt roads, ridges towering above me, valleys dipping into endless green. It was the kind of view that could swallow every thought in your head. By the time I parked and hiked into the woods, the weight of the world felt far behind me. The forest stretched wide and endless, its silence pressing against my ears like a comfort I didn't know I needed. For a while I believed this trip would be exactly what I had hoped for. Just me, the trees, and nothing else. I found a small clearing not far from a stream, just big enough to pitch my tent. Setting up felt almost ritualistic. Poles snapped into place, canvas stretched tight, fire pit lined with rocks. The forest towered above me, ancient and patient, as if it had seen thousands of campers like me come and go. But as the hours slipped by, something in the air shifted. At first I couldn't place it. Then I realized it was the quiet. There were no birds, no cicadas, no chorus of insects that should have been screaming by late afternoon, just the whisper of leaves high above, as if even the smallest creatures had chosen to stay hidden. I tried to shake it off, but then I noticed the trees. A few trunks near the edge of the clearing bore strange marks, slashes carved deep into the bark, uneven and jagged. Not the work of an animal, not neat enough to be a surveyor's cut, just wrong. As the sky dimmed and shadows stretched long, I forced myself to light a fire. The flicker of flame pushed the darkness back a little, but not far enough. And that's when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, circling just beyond the firelight. My heart kicked against my ribs as I gripped the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the tree line. Nothing. The sound stopped, swallowed by the silence. I sat back down, pulse racing, telling myself it was a deer, maybe a stray hiker. Then the steps came again. From the other side this time. Slow. Intentional. Whoever, or whatever it was moving around me, watching. I barely slept that first night. Every rustle outside my tent tightening my chest until exhaustion finally dragged me under. By morning, the forest seemed calmer, almost normal. The fire pit smoldered faintly. The trees stood in their silent ranks, and the footsteps from the night before felt like a dream I'd overfed with paranoia. That was what I told myself anyway. I packed light and set out, deciding I'd hike, back toward the main trail. The sooner I was out of these woods, the better. But no matter how far I walked, nothing looked familiar. The narrow paths twisted back on themselves, looping into places I swore I hadn't been. Tree after tree bore strange scars, marks etched into the bark, too erratic to be natural, too rough to be carved by human hands with care. That was when the calls began. It started as a whistle, faint and sharp, like someone trying to draw my attention. I spun around, expecting to see another hiker. No one. I kept walking, faster now, but the sound followed, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind. The pitch shifted, too smooth, too fluid, gliding from high to low in ways no bird could mimic. Then came the shadows. At first I thought they were tricks of light, but they moved with purpose, slipping between trees just at the edge of my vision. Whenever I turned to catch them, the forest was empty, still as stone. Yet I could feel it, that unmistakable sensation of being paced, tracked like prey. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and I remembered something an old man at a gas station had muttered when I told him where I was headed. His words had sounded half like a warning, half like a joke at the time. If the woods go quiet, it's because something wants to hear you instead. The silence fell suddenly, heavy and absolute. No insects, no birds, not even the sound of branches moving in the breeze. The woods weren't listening to me. They were listening for me. And in that silence, I knew I wasn't lost by accident. I'd been led here. That night, the truth hit me. Whatever was out here wasn't just wandering. It was hunting. I woke to the faint rasp of fabric moving against metal. At first, I thought it was a dream. But when I opened my eyes, I saw the zipper of my tent trembling, inching downward as if unseen fingers were working it slowly. I held my breath, waiting for a face to appear in the gap. But there was nothing, just the whisper of nylon against teeth. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I forced myself to crawl out with my flashlight clutched like a weapon. The beam swept across the clearing, catching something pale on the ground. Bones. Small ones, animal bones, picked clean and laid out in a deliberate shape, a spiral that coiled into itself. My stomach turned. This wasn't the work of scavengers. This was arranged, left for me. That was when I heard it. The whispers. At first they were faint, like the breeze moving through branches, but then words began to take form. Some were voices I recognized, my mother calling my name, a friend's laugh, even my own voice echoing back at me. Other whispers spoke in a tongue I didn't know, guttural, old, carrying a rhythm that felt wrong. They circled me, growing, louder, threading through the trees like the forest itself was speaking. I spun, flashlight darting, searching for the source. That's when I saw it. Between two pines, not 10 yards away, something stood. Tall, too tall, its limbs crooked and long, its body fused with the shadow so that it almost looked like bark come alive. Its face, if it had one, was blurred, shifting with the texture of the trees behind it. Yet I could feel its gaze locking onto me, studying me the way a predator sizes up prey. I couldn't move. My legs locked as if the forest itself was holding me in place. The thing didn't lunge. It didn't attack. It just lingered, watching, waiting. And that's when the realization sunk in, deeper than the fear in my bones. It wasn't chasing me blindly. It was hurting me. Every step, every sound, every whisper was part of a game. I wasn't lost in the woods. I was being led deeper into them. I couldn't stay another second in that camp. The tent, the bones, the whispers. All of it felt like a trap closing in. I grabbed my pack, barely zipped it, and bolted into the night. My flashlight swung wildly, catching only fragments of the forest as I stumbled over roots and rocks, every step louder than I wanted it to be. But no matter how fast I ran, the forest twisted itself around me. Trails I thought I knew curved into dead ends. Trees leaned in like a living wall, branches clawing at my arms, snagging my clothes. It was as if the woods themselves were alive, reshaping into a labyrinth meant to swallow me whole. And behind me, or maybe ahead, I could feel it. That thing, moving faster than anything had a right to. Sometimes I'd catch the thud of a footfall, sometimes the crack of a branch snapping, but always just far enough to stay hidden. Yet every so often I'd see a flicker in the dark, the impression of something tall slipping between the trees. Always ahead, always waiting. It wasn't just chasing me, it was inside me. I could feel its presence gnawing at my thoughts, whispering, doubts, seeding terror. My body was hunted, yes, but my soul felt like the real prey. Every time my heartbeat rose, it was as though it fed, growing stronger, closer. I don't know how long I ran before my legs buckled, sending me crashing to the ground. When I pushed myself up, gasping for air, I saw it, an outline in the gloom, a structure, small, crooked, half swallowed by vines and moss. A shack. Staggering forward, I pushed the rotting door open, its hinges shrieking like a warning. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Old tools hung on the walls. Rusted saws, broken, traps, the remnants of a life that had long since bled out of this place. But what froze me wasn't the tools. It was the carvings. Etched deep into the wooden beams were messages, scratched over and over again in frantic, uneven hands. Some were warnings, others desperate prayers. But one line repeated more than any other, gouged so deep into the wood it seemed to bleed. Don't run. It follows faster. By the time the first gray streaks of dawn touched the horizon, I was no longer running. I was stumbling, half delirious, dragging myself through the undergrowth like something half dead. My legs gave out, more times than I could count, but the thought of stopping was worse than the pain. Then, as if the forest finally decided to spit me out, I broke through a wall of thorns and collapsed onto gravel. A road. I barely lifted my head before I heard the distant hum of an engine. Tires crunched, brakes hissed, and then a man's voice cut through the haze. He jumped out asking if I was okay, but all I could do was mutter, Don't let it take me back." He didn't understand. He just helped me into his truck. As we pulled away, I dared one last glance out the back window. The trees stood silent, endless, their shadows stretching like claws. And there, at the very edge where the forest met the light, a figure stood, tall, still, watching. I'll never know if I escaped that night or if it only let me go. But I do know one thing. The Appalachians never forget who enters their domain. I've always believed the wilderness could heal me, that if I got far enough away from the chaos of the world, I'd find silence, clarity, maybe even myself. That belief is what pushed me deep into the Appalachian backcountry, alone, carrying only a backpack and the confidence that I could handle solitude. I'd hiked before, I'd camped alone. I told myself I was prepared. But the Appalachians are not just wilderness. They are older than belief itself, older than any of us can comprehend. From the moment I set up camp on that first night, I felt it, the weight of something pressing against me. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, like the forest had swallowed every sound just to listen more closely. Every snapped twig in the dark made my stomach twist. Every gust of wind carried with it the suggestion of whispers. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just nerves, just my mind filling the void. But deep down, a truth settled like ice in my bones. I came out here searching for peace, What I found, instead, was the feeling of being watched. The Appalachians don't give without taking something back. When I first reached the clearing where I planned to camp, I couldn't help but stop and just stare. The mountains towered around me, layered one after another until they faded into a misty horizon. The trees stretched skyward like endless pillars, their crowns weaving together into a cathedral of green. It didn't feel like stepping into the wilderness, it felt like stepping into something older, something sacred. For a moment I actually felt awe. The air was sharp with pine, the soil damp beneath my boots. I told myself this was exactly what I needed: silence, solitude, the comfort of being swallowed whole by nature. I unpacked, set up my tent, gathered wood, moving through the familiar motions to steady myself. But no matter how I tried to settle in, a tightness clung to me, like a shadow trailing every step. It took me a while to notice what was missing. No birds, no insects, not even the distant chatter of a squirrel in the brush. The forest was still, too still, and the silence pressed against my ears until I found myself straining for any sound at all. That's when I noticed the trees. Some of their trunks were scarred with strange, deliberate markings, spirals, slashes, shapes that didn't look like any animal's doing. I told myself they were just remnants from hunters, maybe bored campers with knives. But the way the lines cut deep, precise, almost ritualistic, they unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. As night fell, the forest grew darker than I expected. My small fire seemed swallowed by the trees, its glow fighting against the black. I lay in my tent listening to the hollow silence, forcing myself to breathe evenly. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They circled the perimeter of my camp, crunching softly over leaves, never quick, never panicked, just measured, patient. My chest tightened as I gripped the zipper of my tent, yanked it open and shone my light into the trees. Nothing. Only trunks and shadows. I tried to laugh it off, crawl back inside, but no sooner had I closed my eyes than the sound began again. Closer this time. Something out there was walking, and it wanted me to know. Morning should have brought relief, but it didn't. I unzipped the tent, expecting sunlight to chase away the heaviness of the night, but the woods looked different, like they had shifted while I slept. The air was damp, colder, and the sky above was pale, a washed-out gray. I told myself I was just shaken from lack of sleep, that my mind was exaggerating the unease. Still, I packed quickly, eager to move, convinced that walking back toward the trailhead would settle me. But as I hiked, my confidence began to unravel. The landmarks I remembered, the crooked oak near the bend, the split boulder by the ridge, weren't where they should have been. The path twisted in ways I didn't recall, and markers I swore I'd passed on the way in were simply gone. It was as if the forest had swallowed them overnight, rearranging itself while I slept. Then came the whistles. At first I thought it was wind funneling through the trees. But no, the sound was too sharp, too deliberate. A rising and falling note, almost like a bird call, yet strained, off-kilter, unnatural. It echoed again, closer. A second whistle answered, lower, broken, like someone trying to mimic an animal, and failing. I stopped dead, gripping the straps of my pack, listening. That's when I noticed movement in the corner of my vision, flickers of shadow darting just beyond the edges of sight. I turned sharply, scanning the underbrush, but each time I looked, there was nothing. And yet, the feeling persisted, that something was keeping pace with me, always a few steps off, gliding parallel through the trees. The silence thickened. Even the odd whistles ceased, and the forest fell into a suffocating hush. The kind of silence that presses into your ears, demanding you notice it. That's when I remembered a warning I'd once heard from locals in a small Appalachian town. If the woods go quiet, it's because something wants to hear you instead. The memory chilled me more than the cold air. Standing there in that silence, every breath I took felt amplified, every shuffle of my boots like a shout. I didn't just feel watched anymore, I felt listened to, and whatever was out there was waiting for me to make the next sound. That night, Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the trees felt like a footstep, every gust of wind like a breath against the fabric of my tent. When I finally drifted off, it wasn't for long. A sound snapped me awake, the faint zip, zip of my tent door being tugged. My heart lurched so violently I thought it might tear through my chest. I froze, eyes wide in the darkness, ears straining. The zipper inched down, then stopped. For a moment, all I heard was the rasp of my own breath. With trembling hands, I flicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the nylon, spilling light outside as I ripped open the flap. Nothing. No one stood there. Just the same endless woods, swaying quietly in the night breeze. But then my light caught something in the dirt. Bones. Small animal bones scattered in a deliberate arrangement. Spirals, lines, shapes that looked almost like symbols carved into the earth. They hadn't been there before. The whispers began next. They seeped from the trees, low at first, rising like a tide. Some carried my name, spoken in voices I recognized, my brother, an old friend. But when I whipped around, the tone would shift, twisting into strange syllables, dialects I couldn't place. It wasn't language as much as imitation, like something trying to wear human speech as a mask. I clutched my flashlight tighter, sweeping it over the tree line. That's when I saw it. Tall, distorted. A shape that was almost human, but stretched, warped. Its body seemed to melt into the bark, its limbs long and angular like broken branches. For a split second I thought it was a tree, but then it moved. Slowly, deliberately. Watching. The beam trembled in my grip, and before I could react, the figure stepped back into the shadows, gone as if it had never been. I realized then, I wasn't just lost. I wasn't just unlucky. I was being herded. Every step I'd taken, every wrong turn on the trail, it had been steering me deeper. And tonight, it had come close enough to remind me that escape was no longer my choice. I wasn't surviving the forest. I was surviving whatever owned it. I couldn't take it anymore. Staying in camp felt like lying in an open grave, waiting for the dirt to be shoveled over me. I grabbed my pack, half zipped, half empty, and ran into the night. The forest was merciless. Branches clawed at my arms, roots snagged my feet, the ground itself seemed to shift beneath me. What had been familiar paths by daylight now twisted into endless looping corridors. Every tree looked the same, every shadow stretched too long. I wasn't just lost. I was trapped inside a maze that kept rewriting itself around me. And it was, with me. No matter how fast I ran, no matter how far, it was always there, just ahead, just behind, just beyond the corner of my sight. I'd hear a twig snap to my left, then a whistle on my right, then the sickening hush of silence falling over everything at once. My lungs burned, but the fear in me was deeper than flesh. It felt like something was reaching past my body, into the marrow of who I was, sniffing out my soul like a predator. At one point I collapsed against a tree, chest heaving, lightheaded from panic. That's when I saw it again. Through the blur of branches, a silhouette standing impossibly still, yet somehow closer than before. I stumbled onward, delirious, until the woods opened up just enough to reveal it, a shack. Half collapsed, swallowed by vines, its timbers rotting but still upright. My legs carried me inside before I could even think. The smell hit first. Mildew, rust, something older beneath. Crude tools lay scattered. Traps, knives dulled to useless. Edges, scraps of old hunting gear. And then my light caught the carvings. The walls were scarred with words gouged deep as if written by shaking hands. Don't run. Another lower down. It follows faster. The warnings weren't random. They were desperate. Pleas from whoever had come here before me, whoever had thought this shack might be safe. My stomach turned cold as I traced the grooves with my fingers, realizing I wasn't the first to be hunted. And something told me I wouldn't be the last. Behind me, the wood groaned as if something pressed against the shack from the outside. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, I was barely moving, stumbling more than walking. My body had gone numb, running on instinct alone when the trees finally broke open and I spilled out onto a dirt road. Gravel bit into my palms as I collapsed, gasping like a drowning man who'd breached the surface. I don't know how long I lay there before the sound of an engine rose in the distance. A truck slowed, brakes squealing, and a man leaned out, calling to me. I must have looked like hell, mud-caked, clothes torn, eyes wide and wild, but he pulled me up without question and laid me across the worn seat. Relief should have come then. Safety, escape. But as the truck rattled forward, I couldn't stop myself from looking back. Through the blur of trees just before the bend took the forest out of sight, I saw it. A figure, tall and still, standing at the tree line, watching. My rescuer didn't see it. Maybe no one ever would. I'll never know if I truly escaped that night or if it only let me go. The Appalachians don't forget, and neither does what hunts inside them. I should have known better than to come here alone. The Appalachians aren't just mountains, they're ancient, endless, and heavy with secrets older than memory itself. I told myself I was here for solitude, for the quiet kind of adventure people chase when the world feels too loud. But from the very first step off the road, I could tell something was wrong. The forest didn't greet me with birdsong or the rustle of wildlife. Instead, it swallowed every sound, leaving me with nothing but the crunch of my boots and the thrum of my own heartbeat. The trees loomed impossibly tall, their branches clawing at the gray sky as if they wanted to trap me beneath them. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was just unsettled by the silence, but deep down I felt it. Like unseen eyes were watching from the shadows, tracking every move. I thought I was just hiking through history, walking paths carved long before me. But history here doesn't rest. Some places in these mountains were left behind for a reason, and before long I would learn the truth. The Appalachians don't forget, and sometimes they don't forgive. The first few miles of my hike felt like stepping into another world. The mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks dissolving into low clouds that clung to the sky. The air was crisp, cool in a way that made every breath sting with a strange clarity. I told myself this was exactly what I came for. The untouched wilderness, the kind of silence you couldn't find anywhere else. But even in that silence, something gnawed at me. The forest stretched endlessly, the trees older and taller than anything I'd seen before, their bark scarred and twisted as if they'd been holding secrets for centuries. At first, I convinced myself the quiet was peaceful, but the more I listened, the more wrong it felt. No chirping birds, no buzzing insects, no scurry of small animals in the brush. Just my footsteps echoing in a place that felt too vast to ever truly belong to me. That's when I noticed the carvings. Small, deliberate marks etched into the bark of certain trees. At first, I thought they were just old scars, maybe signs, left by hunters or hikers long before me. But the shapes were strange, looping symbols that didn't look natural or accidental. I shook it off, telling myself not to overthink, but unease was already pressing into me. Even the trails seemed to shift beneath my eyes. Landmarks didn't match the map I carried. A fallen log I swore I hadn't passed before now blocked my way, and paths that should have been clear looked swallowed by growth. By the time the sun began to sink behind the ridges, painting the forest in fading orange light, I was fighting the prickling thought that I wasn't alone. And then I saw it. A narrow, crooked trail splitting off from the one I followed. It wasn't marked, wasn't on the map, and yet it pulled at me like gravity itself. I should have ignored it. I should have set up camp, stayed where I was safe. But something about that path, it felt like it was waiting for me. Against every better instinct, I stepped off the map and into the darkening woods, following a trail no one had marked, at least not for me. The crooked trail wound downhill, weaving through thickets until the trees parted into a small valley, and that's when I saw it. A village forgotten and swallowed by the forest. Cabins leaned in crooked rows, their roofs sagging, their chimneys crumbled into rubble, but they hadn't been reclaimed entirely. It was as if time itself had hesitated here, leaving everything in a state of half decay, half preservation. I froze at the sight, my breath clouding in the stillness. There was no sound, no wind threading through branches, no rustle of leaves. Just an oppressive weight in the air, thick with rot and damp earth. I told myself I'd stumbled across some old settlement, one of those ghost towns whispered about in Appalachian lore. But the longer I stared, the more it felt wrong. Too intact. Too deliberate. Curiosity pulled me forward. The cabins formed a circle, all facing inward toward a single stone well at the center, as though whatever mattered most here wasn't the homes, but what the well held. I avoided it at first, circling the outskirts, until I worked up the courage to step into one of the houses. Inside, dust clung to everything like skin, yet there were details that unsettled me more than the decay. Children's shoes lined neatly by the door, a wooden table still set with plates, food long since molded into shapeless husks. It was as if the people had stood up in the middle of a meal and simply never returned. I ran my fingers along the walls, noticing scratches, no carvings, etched just beneath the window frame. More of those strange looping symbols, the same as I'd seen on the trees. My chest tightened. This place wasn't just abandoned. It had been left behind with purpose. That's when I heard it. Faint, distant, carried on, no wind at all. A sound, like laughter. High-pitched, fleeting, impossible to tell if it belonged to a child or something imitating one. My blood iced over. I spun, scanning the doorway, the windows, the forest beyond. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. But I swear, in that hollow silence the laughter lingered, as though the village itself was remembering something I wasn't meant to hear. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridges, shadows swallowing the valley, I knew I couldn't hike back out. The forest trail had already twisted on me once, and stumbling blind through it at night would have been suicide. Against every instinct screaming in my chest, I chose one of the sturdier cabins to hole up in until morning. The air inside was colder than outside, carrying a smell of mildew and something faintly metallic. I unrolled my sleeping bag near the corner, trying not to think about the abandoned shoes by the door or the way the windows seemed to stare outward like watchful eyes. At first, it was quiet, oppressively so. Then the silence broke. A faint creak like weight pressing on a floorboard. Not inside this cabin, but just outside. My heart pounded as footsteps shuffled past the door, slow and deliberate before fading. Moments later, another sound. Wood, groaning as if a door to one of the other cabins had opened on its own. I edged toward the cracked window and dared a glance. That's when I saw them. Figures. Pale, indistinct, drifting between the houses with slow, gliding steps. They gathered in loose circles around the stone well, their shapes wavering in the moonlight as though half there, half not. I ducked back, throat dry. My ears rang with whispers. Low, overlapping voices carried through the walls, though I couldn't make out the words. Then came the movement inside. A chair scraped across the floor behind me, though I hadn't touched it. I spun, pulse thundering, only for the cabin door to slam shut with a violence that rattled the hinges. I backed into the corner, every nerve screaming, when something colder than air brushed my ankle. Slowly, I looked down. From beneath the bed came a whisper so soft I nearly convinced myself I imagined it, until it spoke again, clear as a knife sliding through silence. We're still here. The voice was that of a child. Sweet, fragile, and absolutely wrong in a place like this. I froze, staring at the black gap beneath the bed frame, waiting for movement, for a hand, for a face. But all I could see was darkness, stretching deeper than it should. I couldn't stay in that cabin another second. My legs carried me before I even realized I'd made the choice, bursting through the door and into the night air. The pale moonlight coated the village in silver, but instead of clarity, it only deepened the nightmare. Every direction I turned, every path I took, I found myself back at the same place, the stone well at the center. It loomed like a black heart drawing me in no matter how far I tried to run. The figures were everywhere now. No longer just shapes in the distance, but drifting closer, their pale faces stretched long and hollow. They whispered constantly, a language I couldn't understand, low syllables rising and falling like a chant. The air around me pulsed with it, vibrating in my chest. Panicked, I stumbled into a larger structure, its steeple leaning, its roof half collapsed. A church. The door groaned open under my weight, and I fell inside. The air reeked of dust and candle wax long extinguished. The walls were covered in carvings, hundreds of them. Some were symbols, jagged and desperate, overlapping one another as though carved in frantic haste. Others were words, scratched deep into the wood with shaking hands, warnings, pleas, prayers. Keep them away. Don't drink from it. God forgive us. I crept toward the altar where a leather-bound journal lay open, brittle pages curling at the edges. I flipped through, scanning entries written in a tight, hurried script, accounts of strange figures, voices in the trees, the well at the center of it all. My chest tightened as I reached the final page. The writing was almost illegible, scratched into the paper so hard it nearly tore through. Only 2 lines stood clear. Don't look at the well. Don't answer when they call your name. The words burned into me. My skin prickled as though the writer was reaching across time to warn me personally. And then, soft, but unmistakable, I heard it. My name, whispered through the church door, drawn out slowly, almost tenderly. I froze, every muscle taut. My eyes locked on the door as the whisper came again, closer this time, carrying a promise that if I answered, whatever waited outside would finally step in. By the time dawn broke, I was more ghost than man. My body moved without thought, stumbling through brush and bramble, driven only by the desperate need to escape. And then, just as the first rays of sun lit the treetops, I broke free of the forest. My boots hit gravel, and I collapsed onto an old logging road, lungs burning, throat raw. I lay there for what felt like hours, drinking in the open sky like it was salvation. A passing truck finally slowed, the driver leaning out, eyes wide at the sight of me. He asked if I was all right, but I could barely answer. He gave me water, hauled me into the cab, and carried me away from that place. Later, once I'd recovered enough to speak, I asked about the village hidden in the valley. Every local I pressed gave me the same answer. A puzzled shake of the head, a frown, a muttered dismissal. Ain't no village out there, one old man finally told me, voice firm. Not anymore. But I know what I saw. And when I close my eyes at night, I still hear them whisper my name. Some places in the Appalachians aren't abandoned, they're waiting.